if you're interested in terror, you should look at its causes. Now, if, for the point of view of apologists for state violence, like the ones you're mentioning, you're not allowed to look at the causes because that's considered rationalization or justification. So if you try to look for the causes, like every sane person does, that's rationalization. What you're supposed to do is have tantrums and scream about Islamic fascism and blame it on the bad genes of the Arabs or something. But you're not allowed to look at the causes, and there's a good reason for that. As soon as you look at the causes, you start looking in the mirror. And that you have to block. You know, the main task of intellectuals, always, but now too, is to make sure that people never look in the mirror. We never look at ourselves. We only look at other people. You look through hundreds of years of history, the West has a virtual monopoly of violence. So massive terror is the kind of thing we do to them. You know, they're not supposed to do it to us. September 11th was the first break. It's the first time in hundreds of years that any Western country has suffered on home soil the kind of the thing they do routinely everywhere else, you know. But for the West, the idea that anybody should do to us a fraction of what we regularly do to them is just outrageous, you know. And the same is true in Israel. It's a 35-year occupation. I mean, up until very recently, they were immune, literally immune from retaliation from within the territories. And they weren't acting very nicely there. It was brutal, you know, humiliating, repressive, robbing the resources, kicking the people out, and so on. But there was no retaliation. Okay, last year or two, there's some retaliation. So it's, you know, scandalous. It's also considered a scandal in the West, right? Because we do it to them, it's okay, but they do it to us, it's not okay. You know, so if Israel invades Lebanon with U.S. backing and kills 20,000 people, well, you know, it's the way the cookie crumbles. It's not a problem. But if it goes the other direction, a couple people get killed, yeah, that's a horror story. Yes, there's hatred against us. Why? It's easy to find out. The U.S. is a very free country. We have enormous internal declassified records, so let's look at them. In 1958, the U.S. government faced, we know from internal records, 3 major crises in the world. North Africa, Middle East, and Indonesia, all with oil-producing states, all Islamic states. President Eisenhower, in internal discussion, observed to his staff, that I'm quoting it now, there's a campaign of hatred against us in the Middle East, not by governments, but by the people. The National Security Council discussed that question and said yes, and the reason is there's a perception in that region that the United States supports status quo governments which prevent democracy and development, and that we do it because of our interest in Near East oil. Furthermore, it's difficult to counter that perception because it's correct, and furthermore, it ought to be correct. We ought to be supporting brutal and corrupt governments which prevent democracy and development because we want to control Middle East oil. And it's true that leads to a campaign of hatred against us. Now, until Bernard Lewis tells us that, and that's only one piece of a long story, we know that he's just a vulgar propagandist, not a scholar. So yes, as long as we are supporting harsh, brutal governments, blocking democracy and development because of our interest in controlling the oil resources of the region, there will be a campaign of hatred against us.